Hi everyone, and welcome to a video that I'm probably going to title something like The Definitive Guide to Initial Seed or Initial Seed Generation or something like that in Firered and Leafgreen Pokemon, that is. A little disclaimer at the start right here. My knowledge isn't perfect, obviously. I don't know everything. I don't think I need to say that, so there might be small little mistakes in this video. Feel free to point those out in the comments and correct those. Also, obviously I can't retroactively or retrospectively or whatever, update this video with new information. So if new information comes out, feel free, or is discovered, feel free to update this video in the comments, like leave a comment and explain something that has changed or something that was found out. That way this video will indeed be or stay the definitive source of information on the topic. Obviously you can also create a video of your own and upload that to YouTube. Go ahead and do that if you want to do that. You can also do that. But yeah, the main reason I'm creating this video is in the public space there is not a whole lot of information on this topic, let's just say. There's some ancient 10-year-old thread on some Pokemon RNG forum that discusses how seeds are generated, and most of the information on there is just either flat out wrong or incorrect or outdated or whatever. There were a lot of new discoveries, but most of those were done sort of privately. I found out a lot of those things and a lot of the mechanics myself by doing my own research, but I want to shout out I'm a Blissey here, and Shao, who is a guy or girl or whatever on Blissey's Discord. I'm a Blissey, you can find on YouTube too. He has a YouTube channel. I don't know if Shao has one. Those two people helped me massively understand the last couple of bits, so to speak, that I didn't manage to figure out on my own. Oh, and also, excuse for lack of crazily edited visuals or whatever in this video. I'm just going to explain everything using GIMP, as you can see, and using an emulator, essentially. Alright, now that we got the intro out of the way, let's dive into the video, shall we? Alright, before I actually jump into the meat and potatoes of this video, so to speak, let me just point out the main reason why the visuals aren't super crazy editing-wise is there are two other rather big videos planned in the near future on this channel, and yeah, I'm gonna prioritize those in terms of editing. And yeah, the channel was hibernating for quite a while, I know. Like, for those that are just coming back and are super confused what this video is, don't worry, I'm gonna start uploading regularly again soon, and if you like my content, please leave us up. That would massively help me, obviously, but yeah, no pressure. Anyways, so let's jump right in. I guess we should probably start with what am I even talking about? What are initial seeds? Right, so let's open my my emulator right here. As you can see, I've got a little frame running right here. It's called framecounter.lua. I'm just gonna maximize it for the time being, the emulator, and we're gonna press the unpause button. As you can see, there's a little frame counter up there, and essentially, in a nutshell, how all of this works is the current method of RNG manipulating in Pokemon Leafgreen and Firered is you just wait out the entire intro right here, this entire intro sequence, right? You wait it out. I also have some useful addresses here. We're gonna get to those in a second. I'm just gonna explain how RNG manipulation currently is working. This is subject to change, obviously. And right, as you can see, right now the title sequence stopped essentially, or it's like over, and now we actually start into the game. The title screen is loading, right? Up until this point, we don't press any buttons. That's how that works currently. It might, as I said, is subject to change. On this screen, the game starts generating initial seeds. Now, the initial seeds is used to seed the pseudo-random number generator of the game, the PRNG, and we can manipulate which seed we get by essentially we just wait this out, this entire animation, right? And once we arrive here, we can press A on some frame. We got to time that, obviously, using some timer. Let's just say my timer starts beeping now, and I press the A button, and I hold it. You have to keep holding it until here, roughly. And this is the German version, by the way. Don't be confused by the German text here. It doesn't matter. It works pretty much the same in any language. There's only minor differences. Anyways, you hold A up until this screen, and now we've locked in our seed, right? And from here on out, we can essentially try to manipulate for shinies or for specific IVs or whatever. But this video is about the initial seeds and how they get generated, because that system is kind of complex and convoluted and confusing. But yeah, that's what I'm going to try to explain right here, because yeah, that's what this video is about, essentially. Right, so let's reset the game, and I'm going to start explaining some stuff to you. Now that I've essentially established the basics here, we're going to like how PRNG manipulation currently works, or RNG manipulation, I should rather say. That's usually what it's called. Alright, so how does the seed get generated? Alright, we're going to start very theoretically here, and we're going to inch closer to the actual ground truth bit by bit, let's just say. So, as you can see, the intro sequence is playing out, and I'm going to pause it right here, actually, and show you something. Now, I've got some, in my RAM watch here, in my emulator, I've got a couple of RAM addresses that I've got saved. I guess I'm gonna go through all of them real quick right now. These are like the most important addresses to look out for, except for the last two. These are kind of unimportant, but still interesting maybe. Yeah, these are the most important addresses you want to look at when researching how the seeding works in this game. Now, timer 1 final, this field, is the seed you hit actually. Like the seed gets copied into this field specifically, and that is the seed the game uses to seed, basically, right? Currently it's all zeros because the game hasn't seeded yet. As I explained, that happens on the title screen. Timer 1 control is a control register for the timer itself. For timer 1 to be specific, we'll get to that in a second. T1 register is the timer 1 register in the Game Boy. This is where timer 1 stores its values, or like where timer 1 values can be extracted from, etc. Once again, we're going to get into that in a second. I'm going to explain all of that, what that means, and so on and so forth. If you are using, by the way, these are the addresses on the left here. If you're using the English version of Leafgreen Firered, you will find the PRNG store, which I believe is the current RNG value essentially. You will find that at this address, 03005, and then another 3 zeros. For the German version, it is this value right here. You exchange the 5 with a 4, and then there's another F and a 5 and another 0, and that's the German version of that field. It's a little bit offset for whatever reason. It doesn't get saved to the same address, but essentially it's yeah. You can find it easily on any language. I'm gonna open where is it? Debug. I think it's it should be RAM view or something, memory view, right? You can find it rather quickly and rather easily. I'm gonna show you real quick. Let's just jump to the German version's address right here, which should be, I think, the first two fields right there, right? AB80CC1D, that should be, yeah, that is the German PRNG store value. You can find this rather easily. In this area of memory, like a bit above and a bit below, there's lots of zeros, there are a couple of other values, but most importantly, there will be exactly two blocks, let's just say, as you can see, that spin wildly, crazily, and very quickly. So yeah, it's quite easy to find. You just scroll through, and as you can see, only these two 8-bit fields here are like going crazy, so to speak. So that's how you can find those for other languages, in case that wasn't researched so far. That's how you can find easily. I'm actually gonna have to reset again because I missed something else that I wanted to explain. Now, as you can see, this value is already going crazy, going haywire, but we don't even have a seed yet, and that's why this doesn't matter. The value that's in this field right now is essentially irrelevant. It will just disappear once we actually seed. And we haven't seeded yet. As I said, we seed on the title screen. Now, when do we actually seed? I'm going to show you real quick. We're gonna actually pause right here. And now I'm gonna frame step, and I'm gonna show you what is relevant for seeding, right? So as you can see, there's this T1 register field here. That's the field we're gonna look at right now, and the control field too, I guess. But the control field only matters yeah, in a second when I actually explain how it works, I guess. For now, we are essentially just interested in this register field. Now, the game starts seeding essentially on the title screen, as I said. If you want to know the precise frame, I'm going to show you. We're going to frame step a little bit, and another little bit, and now another screen fades to black. And if we keep frame stepping, in a second, keep an eye out on this value right here. Oh, whoops. Keep an eye out on this value right there. I'm going to keep stepping, another step, another one. And at some point after the title sequence here in the fade out, I'm not going to count the amount of frames, but it's like a couple frames after. Unfortunately, my script isn't printing the current frame up there for whatever reason right now, because I'm paused most likely. Anyways, at some point it's gonna start spinning the timer up. It's gonna stop the timer essentially. I think on the first frame of the title screen animation essentially. I'm gonna have to step another couple of times. There we go. That's the first timer value right here. And as you can see, this changed from 0000 to 0080. And this is now on 0EB4, which the value here, let's just disregard this, but like this is when the timer starts, right? So on the next frame, I'm guessing the timer, the title screen value, the title screen animation is going to start. Oh, not quite. No, there we go. It started animating now. We've arrived on the title screen, and like in the black fade out, the timer 1 value starts spinning essentially, right? And it starts going up and so on and so forth. And at some point we press A. I guess I'm going to unpause now. As you can see, it spins wildly now. And at some point we're going to press A. Let's just say we press it right now. Right? Usually we would hold it. I'm just going to let go of it because for this demonstration right now, it doesn't really matter. Right? So we press A, and then you will hear the Venusaur scream sound, whatever. Right? That's what happens after you press A on the title screen, or in the Firered version, it will be Charizard's scream. whatever, doesn't really matter, right? Now we get a whole bunch of frames where that happens, and then we get this fade to white, and I believe exactly 6 frames after we are fully white, which is right now, I think 6 frames after this, you will notice that the T1 register value right here will get copied over to the timer 1 final value. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 5 frames. I think it's different sometimes. I'm not sure. It's either like 6 or 5 frames, and it might differ by 1 frame sometimes. I'm not entirely sure. It's for now, it's not important anyways. All right, so as you can see, we spin up the timer at the start of a title screen sequence, and in this white fade out, we copy the timer 1 final value to its final resting place, which is this address right here, 0202, and then a bunch of zeros, right? So this is our seed. This is when the seed actually gets chosen, so to speak. Right. Now, I think next thing in order is I actually explain to you how the timer works, because there's a bunch of misinformation on this out there. At least like in this 10-year-old thread, in case you saw that, there is some untruth in there, let's just say. There's something in there that's not entirely true. Let's jump right into that. Alright, so I'm probably gonna link this website in the description. You can also go to GBA Tech. I'm probably also gonna link that website in the description. This essentially is a website that just outlines and explains how the GBA timer works, right? So as explained, after the intro sequence, the timer starts spinning, so to speak, so it gets started, and after we press A, at the end of the title sequence, it spins down, it gets halted, it gets stopped, and we extract our seed, right? So this is how the timer actually works, and I'm gonna explain to you what is essentially not true in terms of publicly available knowledge right now. So in that ancient 10-year-old thread, somebody claims the timer is set up to essentially increment once every, I think, 256 clock cycles or something. That's the claim, but that claim is not true. And I'm gonna show to you right now why that is not true. For that, we are going to switch over to our emulator real quick, which is right here. I'm gonna switch over here, and we are going to, the time's already stopped, so we're going to real quick unpause. We're going to reset, and we're going to just skip the intro this time because it doesn't matter for this purpose right now. There we go, and now I'm gonna pause. So as you can see, the timer 1 control register, which, as I said, this is kind of important, but not really. It's always the same. It's always 0080 in hexadecimal. That is what the control register says. And this register essentially tells you how the timer is set up and how it works, right? So how this timer works is the following way. I'm gonna real quick go back here. It works the following way. We got this this little complicated looking thing, but it's real simple, right? So these are all the values we got right here. Are the value we have in 0080. I'm gonna show you the binary value. These are bits essentially, right? These are bits, and I'm gonna show you the binary value we got, which is 0080. The zeros you can just leave out; it won't even show you on my Windows calculator. If I put into hex 80, we can see the binary representation of that is lots of zeros and 1 1 at the 8th spot essentially, or at the 7th spot if you're 0 indexed. So let's see. So this is a 0, this is a 0, 0, 0, 0, 0, 0, 1. So this one's a 1, right? And what this means is, let's check, EN simply means TM enable the timer. So as we now understand, this simply means the timer is enabled, and the rest is all zeros. The most important part is this value right here, FR, timer frequency, 0 to 3 for 1, 64, 256, or 1024 cycles. And this is what in that ancient thread is pointed out. Apparently the timer increments once every 256 cycles, but that is not true. As you can see, 0 to 3, so this is 0, 1, 2, 3, and as I've just shown you, we have 0, 0 here, which is binary for 0, right? And that simply means we are on this setting, on setting 1, and setting 1 simply means we increment once every single CPU cycle with a frequency of 16.78 megahertz, or in other words, we increment, we increment every single instruction, every single CPU cycle, so to speak, right? So we increment a lot of times. We don't just increment 65,000 times per second, we increment 16.78 million times, I think it is, per second, right? That's how often we increment the timer. Now, in case you don't believe me that this is the truth, I'm going to demonstrate that to you. Keep in mind, this emulator isn't 100% accurate, so, you know, just keep that in mind. But we're going to open this up, and we're going to remove the hex value right here, all right? And now we're going to just put in the timer 1 register value of F76C right now. Also keep in mind, this is not how the actual timer will behave in emulator. As I said, the emulators aren't 100% accurate, so this value in this field right now is most likely, like on this frame, on a real cartridge, on a real Game Boy, you would probably have a different timer value here, because there's some difference between emulator and real hardware. But yeah, let's just take this value, right? F76C. And as I explained to you, we would expect this to increment some couple million times per frame, per second, not per frame, that's important, per second. And I can prove to you that that is indeed the truth by now going over to this website again. And as you can see, it also has a number per frame, which is, it should be noted that the screen refreshes every 280,896 cycles. Exactly, that means we have 280,896 CPU cycles per frame, which would mean that this value would increment by that amount if I frame step one further, one frame further. So I'm gonna do that right now. I'm gonna add 280,896 to this value. As you can see, in this case, the timer overflowed 5 times. It always overflows at least 4 times, sometimes it overflows 5 times, as you can see. We would expect the timer value, so the timer can overflow, right? So if the timer register is essentially full, like if this fills up, then it just overflows. We get a 1 here, but that 1 just gets disregarded. Essentially, it just goes into the void. You can program it so it produce a timer interrupt or something, but Nintendo didn't do that, or like Game Freak didn't do that. The Pokemon games don't do that. They don't utilize that. It just overflows 4 times per second, and nothing happens when it overflows. But yeah, what we're interested in is what is the value of a timer on the next frame. We're gonna frame step exactly 1 frame further, and as you will be able to see, indeed, this is correct. We hit 40 AC as calculated, so that's the proof. The timer increments once per CPU cycle, not every 256 CPU cycles or whatever. That is indeed how the timer increments, right? All right. Okay, so I hope you were able to follow me up until this part. You might have one more question. I hope you just understood how the timer works. In general, it's a bit complicated, but once you get the gist of it, essentially, once you understand how it works, it's kind of it just makes sense, right? But there's one more important part, one more important thing right here, for future research mostly. Which is this value right here, or like this part right here. You can also pause the video, obviously. Essentially, you can set up the timer to reset to some certain value. So let's say if I would go ahead and say, so this field right here, this TMXD field, this is, let me show you, it is essentially the register field. So if I would, before I start the timer, write into the register field, let's say 1000, right? That would mean as soon as I turn the timer on, it will reset to 1000, will overflow, and once it overflows, it won't go back to 0000, but instead it will go back to what I set up beforehand, which will be 100. So we essentially, right, we shorten the timer, so to speak, or like we shorten the values that are allowed in the timer's register. This is not the case because, as I just showed you, this is the value we got after I did the math to step into the future by 1 frame, which essentially just means Nintendo or Game Freak or whatever, the Pokemon games essentially, they just use the default value of 0000. If this value would be different, you would have to modulo out some number. So let's say, for example, as I said, we just got 540 AC or something, 540 AC, right? That's, I think, our result that we just got. So if I would be mistaken and the reset value wouldn't be the default of 0000, you would have to, for example, modulo it by 1000, if that would be the reset value. And then we would get a different value. As you can see, we would get a hex value of AC, which, as you can see, we got 40 AC and not AC, which is, or like 00 AC to be precise, would be what the RAM watch window would say right here. So as you can see, that is not the case. So the default reset value is what Nintendo is using, or Game Freak, or the game, or whatever, right? More importantly, though, there is another very important thing for future research that I want to point out right here, which is, I don't know where it says it on the side exactly. As I just said, you can just pause it right here and read it yourself. But somewhere in this text, it essentially tells you that after you stop the timer, right, the value stays as it is until you start the timer back up. And once that happens, before it actually starts up, it will always reset to its reset value, which, as I said, that's the default value of all zeros. So it will always start spinning back up and start on getting enabled, always start back up from 0. So that might be useful for future research. Maybe the there were some ideas to maybe not start from cold boot essentially, because currently we start from cold boot for manipulating. Maybe we can start from this screen by pressing B, going back, and then the timer starts from 0 again. So maybe this can be used or abused or whatever, right? So this, I'm not sure if this has been tested at this point. I think it might have been tested and doesn't work, but yeah, right? Moving on, right? All right, so these are like the prerequisites to understanding what I'm gonna explain now, more or less. As I said, I just hope you understood all of that. If not, then just, go back. But yeah, so this was linked to me by Xiao. This is, as I said, from Blizzard's Discord. This is essentially the main game loop, and we're gonna start looking at this now. And I'm gonna start by explaining it very watered down, essentially, and then I'm gonna get more detailed as we go on, so you can understand it all and understand what I'm explaining here, right? So there are like 3 parts to this game loop. We can disregard most of this code. There are just 3 parts that I am interested in, or we should be interested in for now at least. Maybe in the future we find out more stuff and like the code in between gets interesting too. But for now there are only 3 parts that are interesting. And that is read keys right here, that's part 1. Then we got the main game loop, which we simply do not care about at all. It goes up to here roughly. And then we got the final call right here, which is wait for VBlank, right? So this is the final call. And these are the 3 parts that we are interested in. So how this code works, and I'm gonna start very watered down here. As I said, we're gonna start very basic. We're gonna start without pressing any buttons, right? So how this code works is, as I explained earlier, currently we go from a hard reset, right? We hard reset, and we start up the game, and the timer isn't running. Right, so we don't press any buttons here for a very simple reason. As soon as you press any buttons, this entire title sequence essentially derails and is no longer deterministic. But if you don't press anything and the game just starts up, right? You just start the game and don't press anything, it will always start the same. I think that much should be understandable, right? So up to this point, we just don't press anything. Okay, so like the title sequence played out, we didn't press anything. Cool. So since this is an ancient old Game Boy Advance, we're looking at, there's no date functionality or anything for seeding. It just seeds from this timer. Oh yeah, I should also mention, when the final seed gets chosen, the timer just gets stopped and the value gets copied over. There's no fancy math here. It just gets copied over. The seed is literally the value of a timer 1 field, right? So there's no fancy math there. All right. So up till here, we don't press anything, right? And the reason for that is, if you would press something beforehand, first of all, you would skip the title sequence, and it would be very hard. You would essentially just add another frame perfect button press, because as soon as you press, let's go back, as soon as you press something here, I can't press yet, but like here for example, if I press something, it will immediately start the timer essentially. So this is no good, because that would mean we would have to frame perfectly skip the intro, and then still get another 2 frame perfect inputs to get our seed and then get our target frame for shiny or whatever, for example, right? Or I should rather say our target RNG advancement later on. So that's why we don't press in the title sequence. However, there's another reason we don't press, and that is the following. If you would press before the timer starts spinning, right, you would essentially offset when the timer starts exactly. So if we don't press anything beforehand, the timer will always start on the exact same CPU cycle in the frame it gets started on, because, as I said, it's deterministic. We don't press anything. The game just does what it always does, and it's always the same, right? Now, where it gets complicated is when we actually start pressing buttons and stuff, right? Because at some point, like during this sequence, we have to press the A button, essentially, right? To actually seed the game. Okay, so I'm going to pause it right here. So during this sequence, we will press the A button at some point. Now, my initial explanation right now will just it will just imagine that the game just knows that you want to advance and you don't press any buttons, and everything is fine, right? That's how we're gonna start our initial explanation. Okay, so let's start with the initial explanation, so to speak, right? So we start the game right here, right? That's where we start the game. So this is where the game gets started. Then we've got the title sequence, blah blah blah. Now, the first important event is this one right here. This is where the timer spins up. As I said, we don't press anything right here between game start and the timer spinning up. So this is always the same. So this is like T1 start, right? Let's shorten it like that. T1 start. Time 1 starts here. And in my initial explanation, as I said, we just pretend the game just knows. The game can read our mind and just knows at some point we want to progress, right? Let's say we press the button here, right? Like we don't press a button, the game just knows. We don't press a button, we don't offset anything. In the theoretical world where we don't press anything, the game just knows. It will just go the typical delay up to here, let's just say. and it will stop the timer. This is T1 stop, and then we will get our seed. Right. So T1 stop, T1 start. The game knows we want to stop the timer, right? We want a seed, and then the timer stops. Now in this world, if this is how it would work, so to speak, it would be somewhat easy to figure out all the seeds from this, right? Like all possible initial seeds. This is kind of what this is, what this is about. I tried to essentially dump all the seeds, and it turned out that is rather complicated by math alone, because we kind of haven't figured this out entirely. All right, so as I explained to you, it will always increment by the same amount, which is I think 280,896 or something. Yeah, I think that's a value. So it will always increment by this amount between frames. And what I mean by that is, let's look at it like this. So let's say we start the timer right here, right? As I said, T1 start, we start the timer right here. But that's not entirely true, right? So what actually happens is we've got a frame. So let's just say this is our frame, right? And there's 280,896. I'm just gonna do it like this, 280,896 CPU cycles. Oops, I missed a C. Right. So this is our frame. We are obviously not going to start our timer. We're not going to start it like right at the start of the frame. Let's just say we start our timer right here, right? So all of a sudden, when we get here, which is where the frame ends, where VBlank gets called, whatever. All of a sudden, we reach this point. Let's just say at this point we are at not to like this is 0, this is 280,896, and at this point let's just say we're at like 10,000 cycles or something. So that means we are, when we reach this point right here, we are at 280,896 minus 10,000, which puts it at, I don't even know, 270,896 or whatever, and that would already alter the value that we would see in our emulator right here, because the emulator, I think, don't quote me on this, but I think if I press the frame step button like this, right, I've stepped one frame, I think it skips from one VBlank to the next, or something like that, or like from the start to VBlank to the next, to the start of the next VBlank, or to the end of, like from end to end, in terms of VBlank. I'm not entirely sure how it works, but I'm pretty sure that's how that works, right? What I'm trying to say is, however, the first value we see will indeed not be this value. It won't be 280,896. It will probably be, depending on when the timer exactly gets started, because it doesn't get started right at the start of the frame, right? We will probably see like, let's say 270,896. Whoops. 270,896. Right? So like 2230, let's just say, just as an example. That's the first value we see. I'm not entirely sure when this happens. It might also happen like here or wherever, right? It might get started wherever, but the timer gets started at some point. Now, what I mean by this 280,896 value, like as I showed you, we can see that it gets incremented by that much if I frame step. In the emulator means simply one thing. If I'm gonna draw another little frame thing here. Let's just say this is frame 1, right? Frame 1, this is frame 2. And if we time step with the emulator, what happens is, let's say we look at, let's just keep it simple. Let's say, as I said, we spin up a timer down here, right? This is our timer spin up frame, and the timer starts, and then we go here, and this is the first value we see. So this value would be like right here, right? At like CPU cycle 0 of frame 1. And then we frame step, just to keep it simple, and then we frame step one frame. We go right here, right? And then we look at the value again right here. And that is why it increments by exactly 280,896. In the emulator, we always look at like the same CPU instruction, the same not instruction, but we look at the same CPU cycle per frame, so to speak. So that means if we would look at like, let's hypothetically say, we look at this frame right here, we would in that case go over here and look at like, not frame, this cycle in this frame. On the next frame, if you look at it at the same spot, right, the timer will show like this value plus 280,896, and that's the timer value we get at that spot, right? What that essentially means is we can accurately predict every timer value, right? If we don't press anything, and in a perfect world where the game just runs exactly like this, let's just say, so we read keys right here, then we run all of this, and in a perfect world we always reach here, right? So in a perfect world like that, the timer will always indeed like progress as outlined right here. So it will always go to 280,896 per frame. And we go here and go here and go here and go here and so on and so forth. At some point we press, right? We press the A button. Or like we imagine we press, as I said, because pressing the button complicates things. I'm gonna get into that in a second. And then we progress to the animation, yada yada yada. Let's just say it's always the same, because I think it's actually always the same amount of frames on this part, but I'm not entirely sure. It might be like a frame short sometimes. I don't think so, but I think it's always the same amount of frames. We get to this point right here, And then it gets a little bit more complicated because from the final frame, right? On the final frame, the rules change a little bit. So once again, let's just draw another one of these fun little graphs here. So once again, frame 1, frame 2, and this is like frame second to last, right? I'm gonna call it frame 1 again, and this I'm gonna call frame E for frame end, like frame end, like the final frame. Now the problem we got here, in case you noticed, you can do the math yourself. If you step from the second to last frame, so if I like press A, I'm gonna pause, and if you step from the second to last frame, like for example this frame, or like this frame, I don't know, second to last frame, I think it's this frame probably, yeah? If you step to this frame, to the frame where the timer 1 value actually gets determined, you will notice that it doesn't increment by 288.96, and that has a rather simple reason. Let's say we look at the value right here, and next frame we would expect the value to be, let's just say here, right? So plus 288.96, and we get there. The thing is, the timer cuts short in the final frame. What I mean by that is, right, we look at the value here, we look at the value there, and we would get, just like in this example, we would get this value plus 288.96 modulo 10000 or something, like, you know, the overflow gets calculated out as I explained, but the timer gets cut short. So what I mean by that is, instead of us seeing this value, we actually see this value right here, for example, because this is where the timer gets stopped, right? Because we extract the seed and put it into 0202 bunch of zeros, right? That's where the final value gets put. That's where our seed gets put. That's our seed. And to determine our seed, at some point in the frame, when we reach the logic that determines the seed, right, in the code, at some point here we say, hey, I want to know my seed. We copy that value over, the timer value. Also, the timer value on a more accurate emulator would probably be like this value plus 1. So these values usually aren't the same because it increments like a couple more times, because, you know, copying the stuff over and disabling the timer takes a couple of instructions, so it will be a little bit higher than the actual seed value that you get, just as a little fun fact right there. And we cut the timer short, right? So instead of seeing what we would predict to see, which is we go from here to there, we actually cut it short by a couple of CPU instructions. So in reality, the value we get is this one right here. Now, this value right here, this is the bane of my existence, so to speak, or like the problem, and why this isn't determinable by math. There is some underlying pattern here as to when this timer, when the timer actually gets cut off and gets disabled, right? But theoretically, if that wouldn't be there, you could just, you know, essentially dump and predict all the seeds. But that isn't the case, and I'm going to show you right now what I mean by that. All right, welcome to my funny little Excel document right here, or like Open Office document. So these are some real seeds that come from the real games. In this case, I think it's the English version of Firered, right? And these are real seeds that the game outputs, or like that were dumped essentially using real hardware. It's convoluted, it's complicated. It really doesn't matter where they come from exactly. Blissey dumped them using, I think, an Arduino, and yeah, essentially it's some kind of test bot, in case you're familiar with that word, whatever. So these are real seeds. Now, what I did is, as I explained to you, between every frame, we increment by 288.96. Not by this value, but instead by this value. It turns out that there are subframe seeds. We're going to get to those in a bit. And there are also, as you can see, there are seeds that are valid for more than one frame. So instead of 288.96, I incremented by, we divide this by 2, by 144.448, as you can see right here. This just means modulo of the sum of the field A5, which is this one right here, plus 144.93. Maybe I did some math mistake there, or maybe I guess one of these values here is wrong. Maybe, what was it, 288.96? Maybe that's the wrong value. I don't know. What was it? Yeah, I don't know. Maybe the value isn't perfect. It doesn't really matter. Anyways, I guess I typoed here. That might minorly change results. But yeah, essentially I predict from this, right? From this seed, we predict this seed by going ahead, adding half a frame, because as I said, there are subframe seeds, so there's like there can be up to 2 seeds per frame, at least that's what is believed right now, but there can be up to 2 seeds per frame. And so to get to this one, which is half a frame in the future essentially, right? We go ahead and add half the cycles of a frame, and then I just went ahead and subtracted this field right here from this field, so we get the difference, right? So how accurate is our prediction? And then we just take this value right here, and we do it all over again. But this time we don't take this real value. Instead, we take this value that we calculated and we step into the future of that. Because theoretically, from this value right here, if we step half a frame to the future, we get, like, what I'm trying to predict here, to explain to you what I'm doing here, I'm trying to find out how big this area right here is, right? How much time, whoops, that's the wrong layer actually. How much time passes before we get to here? That's what I'm trying to predict with this, right? So in a perfect world, this would always be the same. So in case in the case of a perfect world, what that would essentially mean is these two values would be the same, but they clearly aren't. To be precise, since we've got a triple frame here, these two values would be the same, but they also aren't, right? So that's an error right there, and clearly that means this right here on the last frame, the amount of cycles before we actually stop our timer isn't always the same, right? So this is always different. This is not always the same, but it seems to follow a pattern. I'm going to show that to you. I created a graph somewhere in here. And as I said, I think there's a math mistake here. I think this number actually is wrong, maybe. It might be that I put the wrong number there. I don't know. Whoops. I'm not entirely sure. But regardless, as you can see, there is like a pattern here. It's almost like low, mid, then you got some high numbers here. Some of these are probably outliers. I guess the real high numbers are probably outlier values that appear because, as I said, there's some double and triple frames and stuff. So that is probably why there's some real crazy outlier values right here. But there's like some pattern here, as you can see, right? But it hasn't been figured out yet. So this is one of the things that we don't know about yet. We don't exactly know why it varies by arbitrary amounts. I guess we don't know that yet. My personal theory is it's the game unloading stuff from the intro sequence. So it's probably like if we go here, if you go back, as you can probably see, there's stuff moving here. Not yet. Now there's stuff moving in the background. There's leaves moving in the background, and the game is probably preparing stuff for when it transitions to the actual game, so to speak. So I'm guessing there's stuff getting unloaded. There's other stuff happening in the background, animations, whatever. You name it, and it happens. You know, there's a lot of stuff happening in the background. So I'm guessing that's what leads to some of an offset. But yeah, it looks predictable, and maybe it can be figured out in the future. Also, in case it wasn't clear, these seeds get generated by pressing A, essentially. So like I could press A on this frame and get seed A, then I go like one frame to the future and now press A on this frame and get a different seed, and so on and so forth. So that's how this list gets generated, except this list is generated with subframe seeds in mind. So that means we press A at the start of frame 1, and for the next seed we press A like 8 milliseconds later at the end of frame 1, essentially, right? Because one frame is a 60 frames per second game, so we press A once every 8 milliseconds and get a whole bunch of different values. And as you can see, sometimes the game generates clone seeds, so to speak, like double seeds, and sometimes it even generates subframe seeds. As you can see, there's like this is one frame, right? These two are one frame, and there's the next frame. As you can see, there's like a seed that's valid for like half a frame here, and then suddenly the next one is valid for like 1.5 frames. So like what's happening here? How's that happening? Yeah, I'm gonna explain that to you also in a second. But for now, as I said, so if we pretend we don't press anything, and we live in a perfect world where this code runs and ends up down here, and we just always wait for VBlank, the only difficulty would be that. The only difficulty would be the fact that we like can't accurately predict the ending, like the amount of CPU cycles before we actually stop the timer, right? Because as I explained, the offset from frame to frame is always the same, so it's always 288.96 cycles. That's how long it takes from one frame to the next in a perfect world. That's exactly how many cycles we take. And so that can be predicted. What can't be predicted is this part right here. So this is like the final frontier, so to speak. Even if we figure out everything else, this is like the biggest problem right now. If we want to like mathematically be able to deduce all possible seeds and stuff like that. So that's like the biggest problem of them all. But there's more problems which compound onto this. And I guess let's get into the next one, which is let's stop pretending we don't press A, because we have to press A to, get from here to there. This is an A press, and as soon as we press A, something very funny happens. Let's keep predicting that, or like keep pretending that we get to wait for VBlank, so we fully execute everything and get to this part right here. The thing is, as you can see, we always read keys at the start of a frame, and this has some, let's just say, catastrophic consequences. Those consequences being, if I press A on some frame, so let's just say, let's open this back up. I'm gonna delete everything now, because why not? Right, so let's delete this. I guess let's not delete it. Let's just delete this part right here. There we go. And let's draw from scratch. Whoops. All right. So once again, oh, that's the wrong tool. Once again, we got like our frame here. So this is just one frame this time, 288.96 cycles as established, right? And we don't press A. Nothing out of the ordinary happens. And like, let's say we get to wait for VBlank right here, right? We get here, and this is just all, we're just waiting here. This is not how it works, but like, let's pretend it does for a second, right? So we get here. Now, what happens here? Here is something funny now, and that is if I press A right here, right? If I press A right here, actually, let me draw it again. So this is how it works if we don't press A. There we go. And now we pretend we press A. Right. So let's say I press A here, right? And the game notices I pressed A. What happens is it has to check for that, right? So as soon as it realizes I pressed something, it will most likely run some code, right? But the thing is, as soon as we run some code, everything changes, right? Because this happens at the start of a frame. So let's just say we run like 2 or 3 CPU instructions for that, and they take a couple cycles. Let's just say it takes 10 cycles or something, and all of a sudden we reach wait for VBlank right here. And this difference is actually a huge difference, because let's just say the code for wait for VBlank is some short loop, right? It's like I don't know. We load the VBlank interrupt flag thing. Right, we load a value into some register, we check that register, and then we unload it or whatever, and then we go from scratch. The thing is, whenever we reach that part, right, like whenever we restart the loop, we do it all again, and it takes, like every one of these instructions might take, I don't know, a couple of CPU cycles, right? So let's just say the first instruction takes like 1 cycle, the next takes 2 cycles, and then one takes 5 cycles, and the last one takes 3 cycles or something. Let's just say it's 4 instructions to keep it simple, right? I'm not entirely sure if this is accurate, so like, take this part that I'm explaining right now with a grain of salt. But and as I said, this would be in a perfect world anyways. But so if we don't press A, let's just say we end up here, right? We end up on 2 cycles, all is fine, all's good in the world, and then the interrupt flag gets raised. We get interrupted, and we stop waiting, and we would, in theory, like, because this takes 2 cycles, we would like overflow by 1 in this case, right? Actually, wait, let's right. So if we don't press anything, we overflow by like 1, right? Because we hit this. This is what we would hit. This takes 2 cycles, and the processor doesn't cut it short. The processor says, sure, let's finish executing this, and then it raises the VBlank interrupt, and we jump out of this, and yeah, so we increment 1 extra cycle, and the next VBlank happens 1 frame late. So suddenly all is shifted, all is offset, and yeah, this I'm pretty sure this would like go through till the very end, till the end frame, and suddenly we increment our final time 1 value by this 1 right here, right? In theory, but it will compound because suddenly because of this on the next frame we don't hit the 2, we increment 1 further because everything happens one cycle late. So next frame we would hit 5, but we would get some cycle, right? So this frame we hit 2, then we hit 5, then we hit like, I don't know, due to the 5 I'm sure you get it. So the next frame we hit like the 1 right here, and so on and so forth. But there's like some cycle here, and yeah. So if we press A, we don't hit the 2. If we press A, as I said, let's just say, let's keep it simple. We increment, like not we increment. We run for 1 extra CPU cycle. Like everything else gets in between gets shifted by 1 CPU cycle. So suddenly we don't hit the 2, we hit the 5, right? So suddenly we don't have consistency anymore, right? Because we overflow by 4. Instead of overflowing by 1, we overflow by 4. I'm not sure if that would actually get executed. I'm not entirely sure if that would also get cut short by the CPU. At some point, if an instruction takes too long, it will probably just cut it short entirely. But suddenly we delay our VBlank by 4 instead of by 1, right, on the next frame. And once again, we start drifting from there because everything is delayed by like a couple of CPU cycles. So suddenly we end up here, and then we end up there, and so on and so forth, right? It's all a big mess, but it's a cyclical mess, right? It would be a cyclical mess, I should rather say. What this essentially entails is the reason we hold A, and we will probably always have to hold A, is if we don't hold A, depending on how big this code block is right here, right? Depending on how big this part is, assuming we always wait for VBlank, which is not the case, but assuming that is the case, pressing A and not holding it could either result in a seed that's incremented by 1, by 2, by 5, or by 3, right? Because, as I said, it's not consistent. Like, as soon as we stop pressing A, suddenly, like, we start drifting out of this cycle that I explained earlier. And, yeah, we wouldn't hit the same seed. It would suddenly be like, let's say this is the seed we always hit, like this one right here. The seed with the 2 right here is the seed we always hit. If we press, assuming we always press frame perfectly, right? Or like subframe perfectly, whatever, right? Assuming we always hit this seed. If we stop holding the A button, we might instead hit the seed -1 right here, or like -5, or actually like not -5, like +3, or like a +1, like depending on which instruction we end up on, right? And the reason for that is if you stop holding A, right? Like if you keep holding A, you will always have the same offset right here. But if you stop holding A after, let's say, 3 frames, which, you know, it's not really humanly viable to press on like 1 frame and let go after exactly 3 frames every time. Sometimes you will let go after 5, sometimes after 6, and so on and so forth, right? So that wouldn't be very consistent, and you would still like drift by a couple of cycles because, as I said, this rhythm right here, this offset rhythm thing that I explained, I hope you can follow me. It's a bit convoluted to understand. This would still get like broken, right? That would totally get broken by not holding, but it would still be somewhat consistent. You could only feasibly hit like however many instructions are in this final code block right here, because I'm assuming this again, this is just an assumption, by the way. I'm assuming the wait for VBlank part right here is like a small little loop with, I don't know, let's say 10 different instructions, and depending on the length of every one of those instructions, that's the only seeds you could reasonably hit, right? So it would be kind of viable to let go, but only in this case. And the reason it's actually not viable is, yeah, well, we're gonna get into that now, because now I'm just gonna get into the ground truth. Essentially, we're gonna look at this the way it actually works. Okay, so I hope all of you understood what I was explaining up until now, because now it gets kind of complicated. I mean, it was already kind of complicated before, but yeah, now we get into the real complicated stuff, which is, I lied to you a little bit. This isn't true, right? So this right here, whoops, that's a bit very big. This right here, the blue part right here, that is a lie. This is not true. It turns out the title sequence of this game is very demanding on the Game Boy Advance, and 28896 cycles is not a lot per frame, or like not enough. So what happens is we read keys, and we run through this logic right here, right? And it's kind of deterministic, right? Running through this logic on a frame-by-frame basis, because obviously this animation frame and this animation frame will take different amounts of instructions to render, but they will always take the same amount. Like, makes sense, right? So that is true. But the thing is, at some point we will indeed run out of cycles, right? So we don't always reach here. We don't get here. We don't actually even reach here. We will probably get cut short right here, because we have run out of CPU cycles, and suddenly we raise the VBlank flag, right? The VBlank interrupt flag. So this gets raised right here. So what happens now? Well, now it gets real messy. Now it gets real messy, because all of a sudden our frames essentially cut short. So what happens now is there's an interrupt, right? So what an interrupt is essentially, or what that essentially means is, the CPU will say, yo, it's time to render a new frame, right? So like we ran our frame, we did what we could, but it's time for another VBlank. The VBlank always happens between frames, and the CPU now says, well, it's been 28896 cycles, the time's up. You better be done with your calculations. We need to render another frame. And yeah, what happens now is it will get interrupted by VBlank, and it will suddenly essentially like jump to the next frame, right? It will like jump to the next frame, render everything, and to my understanding, again, I'm not entirely sure about this, to my understanding, it now jumps back to right here and finishes. Like, you see what I mean? So like we do the entire frame, VBlank interruption, we jump forward into the future, so to speak, to the next frame. We render our current result, what we have right now, and then we like finish this, all of its logic right here. We jump back, finish whatever we haven't finished yet, and then we finally reach wait for VBlank. And this really messes with things, right? This really messes with things, because all of a sudden we get, as I said, subframe seeds, we get doubled seeds, because what happens now is essentially, okay, I'm gonna try to explain this in a way that's understandable. It's really tough though. So let's see. So this is our current frame. The left one, this is our frame, frame 1, and this is the future frame, frame 2. So we read input right here, right? So we read input here. Now we reach this point right here, and VBlank gets called, right? So this is our VBlank. So we call VBlank. So we read input, we did all our stuff as far as we could. Then we hit the VBlank point, right? VBlank gets called and does its stuff. So like this is all VBlank right here. Like all of this is VBlank, right? But now we jump back, like because let's pick a different color, I guess. Let's go with, I don't know, red. Let's take this nice little red here. What you have to understand is the frame ends here, right? This is where the frame ends. But our instructions don't. So let's say our instructions have this length, right? This is how long our instructions are for this one frame. So we jump back, and as you can notice, we stole some of our instructions, etc., and we already like VBlanked for the next frame. So what happens now is kind of ridiculous, or kind of funny, funky, I guess you could say. We jump back, and we finish our instructions, and they go up till here, right? So these are all the instructions in this one frame, but it's too much for one frame, because the frame ends right here. And we do VBlank, and we jump back, and then we finish our instructions right here. And this is the point where we reach wait for VBlank, right? So from this point forward, we just wait until here. We wait all the way until here. That's my understanding anyways. I could be wrong, but I think that's how that works. And you might notice something. We checked for input right here, but we didn't here. So this frame, no input. We didn't check for input at all, right? On frame 2, we didn't check for new input, and that's how you get these weird quirks here, where you got like, so as I said, this is like one frame, and on the next frame, we still have like this seed, right? So this seed is valid for 1.5 frames, and that's because this weird VBlank drift thing, because VBlank gets called at some point in the middle of our frame. Yeah, this just messes with everything, right? It makes everything even more inconsistent, and that's like the biggest problem we have. That just offsets everything even further. So like even if we would understand like on the very final frame the weird offset quirk that I showed you right here. So like even if we would understand this, like even if we figure all of this out, there's still this weird inconsistency right there where we don't actually always reach wait for VBlank, because some frames just take too long, or like most frames probably even take too long, and suddenly everything just shifts crazily around, and it's getting kind of crazy and hard to predict. So that's a problem, right? Yeah, I think that's kind of where the knowledge is at right now, generally speaking, for initial seeds. There's one more thing I want to point out and show them, and that is the following thing, because I know that is interesting for speedrunners, so I'm going to show it. If we go ahead and step into a new game, if we hit the new game button, as you can see, I'm on some random seed, whatever, right? So that's the final thing I want to explain in this video, and after that I'm probably done. I'm like thinking about if I forgot anything. I feel like I explained this way too confusingly anyways. But yeah, I hope you people got the gist of this. Right? It's really complicated, but I hope I got the message across as to how the timer value works, how it increments, and what the problems are and stuff. You can just ask in the comments if you got questions. As you can tell, probably I'm kind of knowledgeable about this. I kind of understand this pretty well now at this point. I'm still not entirely sure about the whole VBlank stuff here. Like, if we actually jump back, I'm not entirely sure if you actually jump back or if you just continue with the next frame. But either way, yeah, as you can see, like, stuff gets messed up. Like, some stuff doesn't get executed if we don't jump back. But I think we do jump back. So, to my understanding, this is just an interrupt, and from the interrupt, we just jump back to where we were before. And then we just finish executing, and then we just wait for VBlank, and suddenly you start drifting by like half frames or like full frames sometimes. That's when a frame, when a seed is valid for two full entire frames. I think the craziest value is a seed that's valid for like 2.5 frames even, which is really crazy. So it's like valid for 5 subframes, sort of. Yeah. Anyways, so we go through the intro sequence right here, right? And speedrunners would really like to be able to RNG manipulate their TID, their trainer ID, right? Because if you can manipulate a train ID, for those that don't know, the train ID is always equal to the seed when you start up a new game. So that means if I have a train ID of, let's say, I don't know, let's say we have a train ID of 3375 or something, or like 33750, right? This is my train ID. You can enter that in the calculator and you get the hex value 8360, and that, in fact, is your seed. So if you can always hit the same trainer value, with the same trainer ID, you will always have hit the same seed. or like you're on the same seed, and that means you can essentially RNG manipulate a perfect Pokemon at the start of a speedrun, for example, right? So, oops, I'm gonna move to Ramwatch right now. So, here's something I found out, and that's kind of interesting. As I said, I'm just gonna pause it, whatever. As I said, the time 1 value, once it gets restarted, always starts from 0. So what that means is, if I go ahead and select magenta here, I think it happens after it. I'm actually gonna save state here real quick, just to find out. It's not yet. It is on this box, right? So after selecting your gender, it will ask you your name, and then you press A, and you get to the name entry screen. And well, I'm gonna save state right now, actually, again. All right. So if, as you can see, we got like some seed, and we got some final register value. As soon as I press A here, the timer starts spinning again because it gets restarted. But it starts from 0, right? So what I think is, and I don't think the current information is, or like what people currently think is it's impossible to RNG manipulate your trainer ID. I think it might be possible. This is just my personal theory. What I think is, as long as the point where the timer gets restarted isn't relying on the initial seed that you have hit, right? If this seed doesn't matter and this value doesn't matter because this is not seeded by this seed, right? Or like by this seed to be precise, this is not seeded by that. As long as this doesn't matter, it should maybe be possible to RNG manipulate a trainer ID, but it takes like 4 frame perfect inputs, and it's kind of convoluted and complicated. But I'm gonna explain to you how I think it might be possible. So how that works is, as you can see, there's an animation going on here, and I think it's important that you hit the right animation frame. So what probably has to take place is, on the text box before, you have to essentially frame perfectly hit that button. Like let's reset. I think I'll delete the save state there, so I'm gonna have to reset, unfortunately. So I think you need a couple of like fuzzy frame perfect inputs, sort of, and then you need like a bunch of actually frame perfect inputs. So I think the frame perfect inputs here aren't entirely like necessary. So these are like fuzzily frame perfect. And what I mean by that is, like everything here, this is fuzzily frame perfect. So you don't need to hit exact frames. But as I explained to you, I think the game starts drifting, depending on like by a couple of CPU instructions and by a couple of cycles every frame, depending on when you press A and when you let go of A, right? That's what I explained way earlier. So what that means is, these are like fuzzily frame perfect. You gotta like vaguely hit the buttons at the roughly same frames every single time, and you gotta hold them for roughly the same time probably. You can probably make that work consistently some way or another. And then you get to this part right here. So he tells you lots of stuff. Yeah, there's Pokemon, yada yada yada. Doesn't matter, right? We don't. Oh, whoops. We don't really care about that. Blah blah blah. Not important. And then he tells you, to pick if you're a boy or girl. And at this point, I think this is the one, right? This is where you get asked what your name is after. At this point, this is a frame perfect input. And what you do here probably is you hold it. Right? So you go ahead and you hit this and you keep holding A, most likely. I think. I'm not entirely sure. Now we can let go of it, probably. I don't know. This is just a theory, right? And this animation takes place right here. So you have to hit it on the same animation frame every single time, probably. Like on the, but like animation, I don't think this animation is 60 FPS, but like you have to hit it on like the same animation frame, so to speak. So this is also frame perfect, because depending on what the internal state of the game is, the state of animations and stuff, right? As I explained to you, it's not just important when the timer stops. This is the case in the intro, right? Because in the intro, it's all consistent up until the point where we do our first A press. But like it's also important when the timer starts, right? So, and we control when the timer starts. And if you press A here, at the wrong animation frame, the timer will start at some different offset, because, as I explained, when the timer stops, the offset is always a bit different, right? It's always like drifting a little bit right here, for a very simple reason that it's kind of unknown what it exactly is, but it most likely is like animation data, sound data, whatever, right? Stuff that happens in the background. So you have to, on this screen, you have to hit the right frame. This is absolutely frame perfect. You have to frame perfectly open the timer, like open the naming field, and start the timer like at the proper timing. So what I think is, what you would do is, most likely, you fuzzily frame perfectly, as I said. I'm not sure how important it is to like be frame perfect before this. Somewhat probably. You still offset it by a couple cycles, so there will probably be like a batch of trainer IDs you could hit if you don't aren't frame perfect, like perfectly frame perfect up to this point, but I don't think it matters that much, right? So, because you only offset everything by like a couple of CPU cycles. Anyways, so you press, like you start your timer here, like you press A and start the timer here. I'm not sure if you hold this. I'm not entirely sure about that. This will be absolutely frame perfect, and I don't think you want to hold this, actually. This is important, right? You want to hold it like a little bit, but you, like, so you can hold it for a consistent amount of time, but you can't hold this. And the reason for that is you would, once again, offset when the timer starts, and the button presses that follow this are also frame perfect, and those you need to hold. So, yeah, you can't hold this. So, like, you press it, like, real quick for, like, one frame or, like, a couple frames in a way that's always consistent. And once you get on this screen, this is all frame perfect too, I think. I'm not entirely sure, because once again, as soon as you press a button, and the timer is now spinning, so now it's like even more important to be frame perfect, so to speak. Everything here is frame perfect. So these inputs are all frame perfect, but you can hold all the buttons, because there's a neat little trick I discovered. It's essentially kind of almost made for speedrunning. As a speedrunner, I think you input A, and then you just go to the start button, and then you confirm. What you can do is you can frame perfectly press A and hold A. So you hold the A button. You can press start to get to the OK button. You hold that down too. So now I'm holding A and start. And finally, you press your L button if you use L equals A. It's only possible if you do that, and you hold that one too. And suddenly, you're holding 3 buttons. And yeah, you can hold them all. So theoretically, if you like frame perfectly press all 3 of those and hold them, you can like get out of this menu in like 3 frame perfect presses, holding all the buttons, etc. So in theory, if my, like, this is highly theoretical, this has to get researched, obviously. I'm not going to do it, though. I don't feel like researching this. I'm not that interested in this part. But yeah, in theory, if I'm correct about the fact that this value, this PRNG store value, has no influence on when the timer actually like gets started back up, and as I said, it always starts from 0, so it probably doesn't matter, right? Because this has no influence. It also always starts from 0 in this naming sequence. I think I tested that. If I didn't, then I didn't. But yeah, I'm like pretty damn sure. It also starts from 0, goes to FFFF, which is the max value, and then overflows and goes back to 0, and so on and so forth. So just like during the title sequence. But yeah, I think you like fuzzily frame perfect input your way to this point. Then you start the timer on that gender selection thing. It's probably important which gender you pick too. You always have to pick the same gender, I'm guessing. By the way, you also always have to have the same options in the game, like stereo or mono, L equals A and stuff. That always has to be the same. That also influences, because obviously it modifies the amount of instructions that are run when seeding. So those options also always have to be the same if you want to hit the same seeds. I didn't explain that so far, but yeah, that I guess sort of makes sense, right? That also modifies the amount of CPU cycles that gets passed before you start and stop timers and stuff. Anyways, so yeah, that's what I'm thinking. So yeah, one frame perfect input on gender selection screen. You either hold that or you don't. I'm not sure if you would hold that. You probably wouldn't hold it on the name entry open thing, right? You wouldn't hold it, but you have to hit the exact frame perfect right animation frame, and then there's another 3 frame perfect press and holds, because that makes it more consistent. And that is that on top of that, essentially. That's how you would, in theory, always generate the same train ID, which is very convoluted. I don't know if that actually works, but yeah, it might work. If it works, it works probably something like that. And the reason it's so complicated isn't that it's like, or like the reason, the reason it's so complicated is essentially the start of it all, because like as I explained, like right here, if we just wait at the start, right, the timer always starts at the same frame, or like the same CPU cycle in the same frame, because if I don't press anything, the game always behaves the same without input, right? But that isn't the case on the naming screen, because we press a button beforehand, or we press multiple buttons beforehand, obviously, on the title screen, on the way there. But I think those don't really, like, if we assume that like this initial seed that we like pick right here, right? If we assume this plays no role, this doesn't matter. And as you can see, this time is actually accurate. It's like a bit delayed, a bit after the actual. That's how it is on real hardware too, I believe. But the timer 100 register actually ends up on a slightly higher value than the actual final field or whatever. I think this is too much. So I think it's off by like a couple, like by hex 3 or 4 or something, not by like 100 or whatever this is off, or like 100. Anyways, yeah. So assuming this plays no role, this doesn't matter. The only thing that would matter in that case would be animation data in the background, and what that would mean is essentially all of this kind of doesn't matter, but it does matter, as I said, because that's why it's like fuzzily still kind of frame perfect, because you still drift by some CPU cycles, depending how long you hold the buttons, right? So this is like somewhat frame perfect, but not really. Like just a little bit, sort of. I hope you understand what I mean by that. The really important part would, in that case, be, as I said, this button press right here. So saying if you're a boy or a girl, because this is like kind of like the final step that starts up. And the reason why this is important is, or like frame perfect is, and I guess you would hold it. So you would consistently always scroll the text at the same speed here. The reason that's important is because you got to be able to time when you press on this animation right here. Like you would probably even wait like a couple seconds here to make sure that all other irrelevant animation data has been processed and unloaded, and essentially only this arrow is animating and in the background whatever other stuff's happening, right? And then you just wait and hit it on the precise animation frame. You probably can't hold this, as I said, because you have to let go so you can hold it now, right? And you definitely don't want to hold it until after the timer has started, because at that point you start messing with the timer value, so you don't want to do that either. And yeah, that is that on top of that. I have no idea if it's like coherent to somebody who's like not in this topic yet. I hope this is a good introduction to like figuring out how initial seeds get generated in this game or in these games. As you can tell, I invested quite a bit of time to this. I'm not claiming this is 100% correct, as I said. This is my understanding of it. It's not like absolutely perfect. Feel free to correct anything I'm wrong about in the comments, but this is essentially how the game does things, to my understanding anyways. As I said, what I'm not entirely sure about is if we actually like slip a couple of cycles in the theory where we were like in theory if we always get to wait for VBlank, I believe we slip like a couple of cycles into the next frame, but I don't think it compounds, by the way. If that theory is true, then I don't think it compounds, because I'm pretty sure the CPU will still like essentially loosely keep track of how much we like slip past our like goal of 288.96 and try to correct for that, which is I have kind of like I've done some research into that too, and I believe the CPU kind of self-corrects in that case, which is why we don't drift by like a bunch of cycles every frame. We just drift by like, as I said, like 2 or 3 is what we would theoretically only drift by. And what I'm also not entirely sure about is if we actually jump back. I have actually not researched that part either. That's the only like sloppily researched part on my part, but I'm pretty sure from the interrupt we just jump back to the old frame, which would explain the weird behavior with like subframe seeds and like double frame seeds and stuff. Also, the subframe seeds, in case you're curious, as I said, we only check read keys once per frame, right? And now you might say, how is a subframe seed possible if you only check it once per frame? And the reason is subframe seeds don't occur 0.5 frames, but they occur, as you see, they occur for 3 frames, essentially, right? So this one occurs for like 3 frames, or like for 1.5 frames. That's what I mean. Like, you get what I mean, right? So this is like 1 frame, and this seed persists for another half a frame. Then we hit the next seed, and I'm guessing there's some quirk in the VBlank thing here, as I said. So like this is valid for 1.5 frames, and because we drifted out of sync sort of with VBlanks and stuff and interrupts, this one's only valid for like half a frame, and then we hit the next VBlank, and suddenly we are here, right? We're at this frame, like at this seed, because we can generate seeds that are valid for 1 frame, 1.5 frames, or even 2 frames, or even 2.5 frames. I think 2.5 is the highest, and that's probably like the perfect storm of like VBlank interrupts and code length and yeah, stuff like that. All right, so this is at this point I think the video is like 1 hour and 9 minutes long. It's way too long. I don't know. I hope it's all understandable. As I said, if you like this kind of research or whatever, if you want to support me essentially, feel free to leave me a sub. This channel is still rather small, I think, at this point. Feel free to leave me a sub. But yeah, the main point of this video is to just put this information out there for people that want to research this, because the currently publicly available knowledge is like 10 years old and is indeed not entirely accurate. This is as far as I got in terms of research. The next step would probably be to try to understand this somehow, like mathematically. I'm not a math genius or anything. I'm just some guy, right? But yeah. So as I said, there's like some pattern in here. I think I did the math wrong actually. I just realized that. Kind of bummed out about that, but yeah, sure. You can do this math yourself. All of these values are publicly available. I'll probably also link the seed spreadsheets that I used for this. You can just grab the seeds off of those and yeah, do your own research with that if you want. You can also try to correct my sloppy research here. Well, this value I think is wrong. I'm pretty sure it's wrong. Maybe I did that on purpose though. I don't remember. It's been a couple of days since I did this, but yeah. Anyways, that is that on top of that. I hope you learned something. I hope you understand what I'm trying to explain here. It's really convoluted, it's really complicated, but I hope I managed to clear up some things for some people that are interested in this in general and stuff. And yeah, have a nice day, I guess. Leave me a sub if you want. Don't if you don't want to. That's also fine, I guess. Also leave me a like if you like the video, obviously. Feel free to comment. Feel free to leave new discoveries in the comments. Feel free to correct me in the comments as well, obviously. And also, totally feel free to ask me about stuff that you don't understand. I'll try to explain it again in a different way, or like better or something. I don't know. I'm not entirely sure how comprehensible this video is to people that are like not in the topic itself. I try to understand it in a comprehensible way, but it's really complicated, obviously, as you can tell. It's really not all that simple. So yeah, I guess that's the video. I wish you a nice day. Have a nice day. Have a nice whatever. Do some nice stuff. Do some productive stuff. I don't know. And yeah, see you in the next video, maybe, or maybe not. I don't know. I would obviously be very happy if you would tune into my next video, into my next upload as well, or like in general, if you would follow my channel. Would be greatly appreciated by me, obviously. But yeah, that's about it for this video. I hope you learned something. With that, I guess, see you in the next video, hopefully. Bye.